The Prime Minister announcing that he was easing the lockdown, that there were new measures about being able to gather in groups of 6 and go and see people as long as you stayed in a socially distanced way and you kept the numbers of you meeting low. But today, the Chief Scientific Advisor and the Chief Medical Officer, I felt, were really, really cautious about where we are in this stage of the virus. Chris Whitty at pains there to say that we shouldn't take the fact that small adjustments are being made now to mean the lockdown is over. He stressed that current changes are actually a slight reversal of some of the most onerous measures in terms of the lockdown. They're outdoors and they're at 2 metres. Sir Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Advisor, saying that the R is still close to 1. There's little room for manoeuvre. He said that there was a long tail in terms of the virus. And so in terms of the messaging to the public, it's one of caution. In terms of actually how are the public behaving, well, a poll out today by YouGov said that 1 in 5 people had told the pollsters that they had been less stringent in observing the lockdown rules over the past week, and a third of those who said they had put that down to the behaviour of Dominic Cummings. And it goes back really to that whole scandal, that big row, what was happening there in terms of the public health messaging. Were there mixed messages as to what the public could do? And I think what we saw there today was the Prime Minister and particularly his scientific advisors trying to get the public back onto the page that we are not very far at all through handling this epidemic, and that people really have to observe the rules. And why? Because of the concern about a second wave in the virus. And you heard Sir Patrick Vallance talking about that, and Professor Whitty, where they talked about another global wave, that was possible. And indeed, Professor Whitty went on to say, actually, when you have a new virus like this, it's quite common to have a second global wave in the virus. So obviously very worried still about where this public health crisis might go. We're in a way looking now towards an economic crisis and what happens as we begin to ease lockdown in terms of jobs. But a reminder there, I think, that there is still very much a public health crisis at bay, but could rear up again if this virus begins to have substantial transmission again through our communities.
Beth Rigby, thank you. Protests in parts of the UK have turned volatile as hundreds clash with police outside Downing Street during the Black Lives Matter demonstration. Let's speak to Sky's Mark White, who's following that protest across central London and joins me live now. What is the latest, Mark?
This is what's happening in London about the thing, guys.
What you're looking at is the scene live on Whitehall, just outside Downing Street, between Downing Street and the Ministry of Justice. A number of protesters have taken the knee, this now familiar tribute to George Floyd. It follows scenes really about 45 minutes ago that were rather worrying, a number of scuffles that took place outside the front of Downing Street. We don't know exactly what sparked off that trouble, but for a good minute or so there were punches being thrown towards police officers and police officers pushing back. One police officer was punched in the face. My colleague saw another police officer being hit by a crutch that someone was wielding. So in terms of the actual incident, that has now calmed down. And, people are much more peaceful, but it does remain tense. I think the protesters don't know exactly where they're headed from here, or certainly they're not making that known to us. Some of the protesters are shouting that they want to head to Trafalgar Square, where there's another significant group of protesters. Others are in Parliament Square, but this group here, probably I would say a few hundred strong at least, are here for the moment. That van, I should say, just in case anybody feels that's a member of the public's van that's been graffitied and taken over by the protesters. That is one of the protesters' vans that they've been using. They put their own graffiti on it, and have been on the roof of that van themselves. So I say, peaceful at the moment, still a bit tense around here, and every time we see a group of police officers coming through, there are boos towards those officers and chants of racist police. The police have been trying, understandably, to keep a low profile. The last thing they want to do is to try to stoke any unrest here, but clearly for a while it got a bit nasty as there were punches thrown outside Downing Street, but a bit calmer now.
Thank you. Our correspondent Inzamam Rashid is with protesters in Brixton in South London. Hello to you, Inzi. What's happening there?
Well, look, this is an incredibly poignant place for some form of incredibly peaceful protest to take place. This is organised by Stand Up to Racism, and a good few hundred people have gathered here in South London at the Windrush Memorial site, the original site to Stand Up to Racism. That is their sense here. That's exactly what they've been doing over the last 15 minutes or so. There was a minute silence at 6 o'clock. I'll just step out of the way. You can have a look at the crowd that has gathered here at the Windrush Memorial site. There was just a few minutes ago a fire engine that actually stopped off, and firefighters came out. They knelt down at 6 o'clock and took part in that 1 minute silence, and a number of black firefighters part of that team as well before they ran off, clearly getting a call to go away and tackle an issue somewhere. But there are a good few hundred people that have gathered at the Windrush Memorial site here, and over the past 15 minutes they've been reciting names not only of George Floyd, of course, the death of George Floyd, which has sparked this protest right across the world, but also names of many different British people who have died at the hands of police here in the UK, and what they feel are injustice killings across the UK as well, and some in this part of South London. Now, the Stand Up to Racism have got a number of protests going right across the country. They have gathered in solidarity to pay their respect not only to George Floyd but those other names as well. But there is a sense of anger coming from people here, that the fact that this has now been rumbling on for years, a sense of racial inequality, social inequality has been rumbling on not only in the US but in this country as well, and that's why it seems that hundreds of people, not just here in South London but across the country, for Stand Up to Racism in particular, have come out, are kneeling at 6 o'clock. That's what they did, holding a minute's silence, but also reciting some of the names that they feel have really been served a lot of injustice over the years, especially here in the UK.
Inzi, thank you. Let's go to our correspondent, Enda Brady, who's with protesters in Lewisham in South East London. Enda.
Yes, a very peaceful protest here this evening in South London. This is Lewisham Police Station just beside me. This was all organised via social media. If I just step out of the way, you can see what people are doing here. Very strong race relations in this community in Lewisham here in South London. People have got together via Facebook. I would estimate about 250 people here. They arrived about 10 minutes ago, and bang on 6 o'clock, everyone knelt down on one knee in front of the police station, mimicking, of course, what the NFL star Colin Kaepernick did a couple of years ago in the United States. People chanting Black Lives Matter and I Can't Breathe. I spoke to one of the organisers, a local gentleman, Harold Wilson, and he said to me that people here feel very strongly about what is going on, and that because race relations here are so strong in this community, they felt that they had to come down here. There was an incident on May the 9th, a local woman who was being arrested on suspicion of assaulting a police officer. Between 5 and 6 officers took her into custody, and the whole incident was filmed on a mobile phone, and she was heard to say, "I can't breathe." That was May the 9th. That footage started to circulate really at the weekend, and it kind of basically fired up social media in the area, and a lot of support there, as you can see in the street from passing vehicles as well. But this is a very, very peaceful protest here. Good vibe, and people now will disperse and go about their business, Sarah.
Okay, Enda, thank you. Well, meanwhile, the family of George Floyd have demanded the arrest of all 4 police officers involved in his death as they visited the street corner where he died in the US city of Minneapolis.
I'm here reunited with my family, trying to get justice for my father. And no man or woman should be without their fathers. And we want justice for what's going on right now. And I appreciate everyone showing some support and love. I thank y'all for that.
Our reporter Becky Cottrell joins us now from Los Angeles. Hello to you, Becky. A powerful statement again from the family of George Floyd.
Yes, we heard from Benjamin Crump, the family spokesperson, just then. He was saying that he believed that George Floyd had been tortured by that white police officer. He was speaking at a memorial site for George Floyd in Minneapolis. It's the site where George Floyd died, and many gathered there to listen to what he had to say. He was also talking about the entire world has seen this and cannot unsee this. And that's definitely something we've had a sense of being out in these protests for the past week. You know, people have seen that viral video, the final moments of George Floyd's life, and it was brutal, and it's really sparked a lot of anger, and people want justice. We were also hearing from Benjamin Crump there. He was talking about charges. The family want additional charges to be brought against the other police officers that were there when George Floyd died. One police officer, Derek Chauvin, he has been charged. He's been charged with third degree murder and manslaughter. But Benjamin Crump was saying that the family want that murder charge to be upgraded to first-degree murder. Now, prosecutors would have to prove in that case that there was intent to kill George Floyd, but it would come if it led to conviction with a harsher sentence, potentially life in prison. And also, yes, those other officers, there were 3 other officers that were there when George Floyd died. We know from video that 2 of them at some point were also kneeling on George Floyd. And Benjamin Crump was saying that even if they weren't the ones kneeling on George Floyd's neck, by standing around and by not directly intervening, they were complicit by silence. And he wants those other officers who have been fired to be charged as well. And we're hearing from CNN that we could have announcements on additional charges maybe this afternoon. There is a memorial service tomorrow in Minneapolis for George Floyd, and we're hearing that there could be additional charges announced before that. But it's not just about the charges, it's also about convictions. There have been plenty of cases in recent US history of black men dying in police custody, and it hasn't led to either charges or it hasn't led to convictions. But from being out here, from talking to protesters, it feels like that simply won't fly at this moment. They want to see not only meaningful change in a more broad sense, but they also want justice for George Floyd's family.
Becky Cottrell, thank you. We're going to return now to Sky's Mark White, who's following that protest across central London, close to Downing Street, joining me live now. What is happening there at the moment, Mark?
Well, you can see we're now just back at the gates to Downing Street. Still about a few hundred or so protesters here, right up against the gates. The police, you could probably see just behind them, behind the wall between the gates of Downing Street and where the protesters are. We don't know what sparked the trouble a little earlier here. It's certainly much calmer now, but we'll give you a look at video that we have obtained from someone who filmed the immediate scuffle as it took place on their mobile phone. Here's a look at that. So you can see, I mean, it was certainly pretty hairy for a while. There were not many police officers at the front of Downing Street because it is the policy, and understandably so, of the Met Commissioner Cressida Dick to try to allow for peaceful protests, to keep as low a police profile as possible so as not to aggravate the crowd, because of course the police are a potential target for the protesters who've been shouting racist police throughout the day here as well, and shouting that a bit more since these scuffles. But there are more police officers here now, some further down the street. They are still trying not to be an overt sort of response in terms of the visibility, but they are here in larger numbers should anything deteriorate again. But certainly things are a lot calmer for the moment, but we don't know just what's going to happen as the protests continue, because there is a large crowd here. There's a large crowd in Parliament Square and a large crowd in Trafalgar Square. Other protesters we know are at the US Embassy, some protesters in Lewisham and in Windrush Square in Brixton as well. So a lot of different groups of protesters, a bit of a challenge for the police to be everywhere, to keep a close eye on them and to make sure that they have the ability to respond should things deteriorate. I should say for the vast majority, of course, of people who have been here, they have been very peaceful. They just want to get their message across that, yes, Black Lives Matter, but also to express their horror, disgust at what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis.
Okay, Mark White, thank you very much indeed. And apologies, we did have some footage there showing a swear word briefly. We are doing our best to avoid all profanities, but as you can imagine, it is very difficult in these situations. This is the News Hour. Coming up, Dominic Raab on why Britain is ready to stand up for the freedoms of the people of Hong Kong, even at the price of a free trade deal with China.
Well, that's a bit of footage of the UK and London, a bit of protesting there. Hope you all enjoyed it. Please like it, comment and share it with your friends, and see you in the next video. Peace.